Good evening, everybody. It is Steve with Real Progressives. Now, some of you all have, been doing your own thing, following the bombings that occurred in Syria the other night. I'm sure that everybody felt a sense of pain and a sense of deja vu that we've been here before. Listening to other Republican congressmen and senators, there is a push for regime change yet again. Sadly, even Bernie Sanders and his other folks are pushing for similar language, pushing the narrative, which is deeply, deeply troubling to me because there really doesn't leave you with anyone holding up the sane flank of peace. But this brings me to yet another major point. Obama dropped some 14,000 plus bombs over the time period that he was president of the United States. Donald Trump shot a mere 49, and people were literally draining their veins of blood as they were freaking out about the U.S. doing what the U.S. does, which is violate the sovereignty of other nations. Now, what I'm telling you all is this. These distractions, however painful they are hiding a more sinister underbelly of what's going on behind the scenes in our United States. Right now, as we speak, the Koch brothers are working with every state house in the nation, trying to pull off a constitutional convention, trying to get a balanced budget amendment, and trying to push more states' rights, like we didn't already fight the Civil War, pushing more states' rights out there. Now, let me tell you why this is deeply troubling to me. The Green Party has Amendment 835, which is very similar to the Tea Party in terms of pushing things to the local communities as well, local economies. Folks, people are not understanding the way economics works in this nation. And everywhere you go, people on the left, people on the right, people in the establishment are throwing around Rothschild this, money is fake that, the system, blah, 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 and they don't understand it. If you ask them to explain how a dollar goes from A to Z, they are not able to do it. Yet they feel like they have a right to have an opinion, and they say it with authority. And folks, as we press down here, even Brother Cenk from the friggin' Young Turks is piping off about having a constitutional convention. Now, I don't know if you guys are even remotely decent at math, but the vast majority of the state houses in America, the vast majority of them are held by radical right-wing friggin' Nazis. And they are the ones that would be able to control the outcomes of a constitutional convention. Folks, it takes a significant vote to make a change even in a constitutional convention, and the GOP is one state house away from being able to do what they want. Now, I am asking everybody that pays attention to Real Progressives and has a brain and a heart and is actually a human fucking being to pay attention, stop being stupid, turn off Alex Jones, and start paying attention to people that really know what's going on. I'll be selfish for a minute. My kids deserve better. My kids deserve better than these potsies out there running around talking about money's fake. We got to get rid of money. We got to do this. We got to do that. Ignorant, horrifically, just ridiculously ignorant people. I feel like they're putting a gun to my kids' heads and saying my stupidity is worth more than your life. That's what I think when I see folks that do this. That's how serious, I don't want to mince words. That's how serious I look at it. I literally see the stupid in this country as putting a gun to my children's head, ready to pull the trigger. I'm here to educate. I'm here to bring people that can educate you all so that you in turn can spread the message so people don't have to die, so the stupid in this country is eradicated. Eradicated. We cannot survive the deep stupid that is taking over our nation right now if we don't rise up and demand intelligence from our citizenry. With that, I did this without Joe on the phone, here on the screen, because I didn't want to have to be accountable for any of my words in this case. But let me bring Joe out, because Joe's got a very, very, very important message about enhanced Medicare for all. So with no further ado, let me bring out Jolton Joe Firestone. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Steve.
Sorry about that.
Before I get to, it's okay. Before I get to my the message of the night, I want to add a few words on the idea of having a constitutional convention right now. I understand why progressives want to have one right now, because they would like to pass amendments or rewrite the Constitution to get rid of CU and to stop the Supreme Court from declaring campaigns finance laws, perfectly reasonable ones, unconstitutional, and also because they would very much like to get out of the idea, get rid of the idea that corporations are people. Now, I completely agree on those things. I very much want to do those things also. But for the reasons Steve has mentioned, a constitutional convention right now would be premature. We have to do this the hard way. First, we have to take back the two houses of the federal government. I'll tell you why in just a minute. Second, we have to take back at least a majority of the state houses across the country. That's the only way to ensure that a constitutional convention would not be controlled by the rightists. Okay? And thirdly, the reason why we need to have control of the Congress again and also control of the presidency again first before we go to any sort of amendment process or con process is because we can get rid of CU and we can also get rid of the idea that corporations are people. And I will tell you how that can be done. In one of the clauses of Article 3 of the Constitution, the authority is, Article 1 of the Constitution, the authority is given to Congress to remove the appeal jurisdiction of the Supreme Court in any legislation that Congress wants to prevent the Supreme Court from reviewing. It can take away the appeal authority of the Supreme Court in specific instances or specific laws. So, if we were to once again grab control of Congress and grab control of the presidency, and we passed a law basically outlawing CU or providing for campaign financing that does not rely on private money, and if we wanted also to specify in law that corporations are not people, that they are artificial constructs, and that they're not entitled to the protection of the Bill of Rights. We could pass that also and prevent the Supreme Court from having any say over that legislation. Now, I'm telling you the truth about what's in the Constitution, and therefore the strategy I'm suggesting is a better strategy than having a con because it would not be possible for the right wing to stack the con so as to destroy democracy. Of course, we practically destroyed it ourselves already. But the point is, we still have the capability to take it back. Okay? And if we use the electoral processes that exist now to block any further deterioration, and then to take back our voting rights, and to take back the two houses, of Congress, we can get CU out of the picture and corporations as entitled to individual rights out of the picture also, without actually passing amendments. Then once we've done that, and once we sweep the field of the influence of the corporations and the wealthy, then it will be time to pass amendments and have a con, because then we will be in a position to stack the con and to determine what exactly the amendments are going to say. So I'm not against amendments, and I'm not against a con, but we have to approach it intelligently. We have to approach it from a political point of view. We have to make sure that the right people, the progressives, will be in control of these mechanisms and not the oligarchy. That's a key thing. Right now, our major task has to be to block the oligarchy, to stop any con, to try to block further influence of the corporates on the political system by scaring our representatives, by making it too hot for them to vote in line with the money. Now, we've started to do that in a few ways. We've had some successes about that. Most recently, the blocking of the HCA bill. Or was it the ACHA, the Affordable Health Care, the Affordable Care, the AHCA.
The dumb right-wing version?
The dumb right-wing version.
There you go.
Would have killed an enormous number of people. Absolutely. Okay. We managed, in alliance with some of the right-wing people, to get rid of that for the time being. It will probably be coming back, but we'll be called upon to fight again in relation to that. Pretty soon, we're going to be called upon to fight for net neutrality. Net neutrality is essential to us because the internet is a primary tool for organizing that we have. We can't allow the large corporations to totally control the internet. We now have the power through the internet even to disintermediate them. In other words, who built Facebook? We built Facebook. You and I and everybody else who uses it has built Facebook. And if we want to, we can unmake Facebook too, right now. But once we give them control of the internet, once they can control which traffic will be seen and which traffic will not be seen, then we have multiplied the difficulties, multiplied our difficulties many-fold. So we have to keep our eye on the ball, and we have to keep our eye on what the important things are to do. So I very much agree with Steve on that. I disagree with the Just Democrats. I think they're not thinking strategically. Their heart might be in the right place, but they are not thinking strategically. It's not going to happen in such a way that it will be a good outcome for us. Instead, is likely to happen is that the right wing will control all the reforms. And if you don't know what's going to happen after that, what will happen is that they will produce an onerous constitution which represents a tyranny in relation to many of our states, the East Coast states, but the West Coast states, and even though they don't realize it, also the North Central states. And the result of all that is going to be the unmaking of the United States of America. If you allow this to go forward, you are looking at a Cal exit. And not just Cal exit, you're looking at Cal and Washington and Oregon.
Texas.
And who knows what other states are going to choose to go along with them. Those states could be a nation of something like 70 million people, the three of them together, or close to that. That's a pretty big nation, perfectly capable of feeding itself and arming itself and defending itself. Okay? They're in the United States out of loyalty, history, and because the present arrangements of government are not so onerous that they don't have a say. But if the right wing has its way, they won't have a say out there anymore, and we in the Northeast won't have a say either. All the people in the Northeast, okay, now underrepresented by the present Constitution, are going to have representation cut out from under them. Even that influence cut out from under them. If we get the kind of Constitution they favor, this can't possibly become a democracy again. It's going to be run by corporations that dominate the small states and the rural states and the ones that have an ancient form, okay, of ideology. And the only way for us to get back, okay, is going to be for us to go somewhere else. I wouldn't be surprised. It's even within the realm of possibility that the northeastern states would join Canada in a greater union, and that the West Coast states would also join Canada in a greater union. I don't know how the rest of the country would like those apples, but it could very easily happen, because why would I want to live in a country that will never have a Medicare for all bill, an enhanced Medicare for all bill? Why would I want to live in a country forever that has Social Security pensions that are 50% of what a lot of the rest of the industrial world has? Why would I want to live in a country that's always getting into unnecessary wars and that I have no political say in? Answer, I don't know how you feel, but I would not.
No, and Joe, let me just state something real quickly. I think it's important for the people that are swept up in this Dementer strategy and this Justice Democrat strategy and all these other strategies, when you listen to them speak, if you care about your kids, literally, folks, if you care about your children and they cannot answer how to fund basic services because they still believe a deleted tax pays for a service, you are equally in trouble there. Look at what Cenk is doing. Cenk is wrong on economics. Cenk is wrong on a constitutional convention. Cenk is wrong on supporting Hillary Clinton. Cenk is wrong. I have yet to see an area where Cenk is right. This is a problem. This should be like sending off like huge beacons of light going ding, 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 moron alert, moron alert, moron alert. These folks, I don't care if their heart's in the right place or not. If they're leading my child to slaughter, what do you think I'm going to care about? You think I'm going to care about my kids and the future they inherit, or being a good Democrat, or being being a good guy on this team. F that. And when you have knowledge, you use knowledge. And you don't let people with less knowledge lead you by the nose. You never allow someone that doesn't understand economics or any of this stuff leads you around by the nose. And folks, I'm watching an awful lot of people desperate for a savior, allowing these people to drag them around by the nose. And that should scare the living crap out of each and every one of you. So with that, Joe, I'm going to let you talk about your show now, brother. How about it? I had to get my shots in because this is stuff that keeps me up at night.
Well, that's all right. I hope you don't mind my joining in.
Not at all, sir. You take over now.
Okay. So I want to know how many Americans will die needlessly before Congress finally passes national improved Medicare for all, or NIMA for short. 2 weeks ago, when I also talked about the Medicare for all situation, I pointed out that from 2009 to 2016, Obamacare left on the table 356,049 fatalities that would not have occurred if we had had a Medicare for All program, which I believe Obama could have passed in the first 3 months of January of 2009. But my discussion of how that could have occurred, in detail, has to wait for another program. I've said a little bit about it before, but I think it's obvious and transparent if you go back to a history, of that time. I'm not going to say he screwed up because I think he didn't want to pass Medicare for all. And he was instrumental in tanking it, at that time. But he sold us out, and I think that's quite clear. Anyway, I also pointed out that if something like the AHCA had passed, that is the Republican bomb that failed, that would likely have also resulted in even more fatalities between 2017 and 2024. Roughly, because it's really hard to project over a long period of time, 467,000 fatalities. Even more than in the last 8 years. So, that adds up to something like, 823,000 fatalities. That is, 823,500 deaths over 16 years. That is provided Trump finally passes something like the AHCA. The military deaths in World War II totaled 405,000. So we're looking at losing twice as many Americans, but needlessly, over these two administrations than we lost in the biggest war the United States ever fought. Please remember that. Now, since I gave my talk a couple of weeks ago, I ran into a few articles that dealt with research done over the last 5 years or so that gave one the data one needs to express the odds. In other words, each of the studies gives you a measure of the odds of dying if you're among the uninsured. The estimates I gave you the last time were based on an odds ratio of one fatality in 781 of the uninsured people each year. Okay. But there are some other estimates. There was a study that appeared in 1993 by Franks and co-authors. That was an age cohort study. In other words, a particular type of survey study based on survey data. That gave odds of 1 in 1,239, which means, of course, that if those were the odds at present, not quite as many people would have died, as did die. Why would things have been different in the early 1990s than now? Well, the medical technology necessary to save people has been getting better over time. So it stands to reason that the gap between the uninsured and the people who are covered would also get worse in terms of the odds of dying. Then there's the study that I based my earlier analysis on, which was the one managed by Steffi Woolhandler. And that was a study that was written up by Wilper and his co-authors, including Steffi Woolhandler. Okay. And in a recent editorial written by Steffi and her very frequent co-author, David Himmelstein, and the two of them were co-founders of the Physicians for a National Healthcare Program. That is the major organization continually lobbying for Medicare for all. Their article expressed the odds ratios in a number of studies. First of all, in their study, the results of which was published in 2009, and the odds ratio there was 1 in 1,094. Then there was a study, the Oregon experiment. It was a state-level study with a quasi-experimental design. It used a lot of county-level data, so it wasn't even really at the individual level. But it used census data, and data from the NIH, the area research files to estimate the odds of dying, if you were not insured. And it came up with an odds ratio of 1 in 769 fatalities. And Summers, B.D. Summers, and his co-authors in 2012 published a study which used an estimate of 1 in 830 fatalities. And then Summers in 2016 by himself did a reanalysis of the data, kind of an updating of the original data he used, which involved studies of Arizona, Maine, in New York. And in that study, he came up with an odds ratio of 1 in 300, which is by far the study that claims the greatest amount of risk, if you are uninsured. In fact, that ratio is so low that where in the past, God bless you, Steve, we estimated that if we had 45,000 people who didn't have insurance, or actually 43,000 people, we would get maybe 45 out of that. That's the headline figure, which is usually used for fatalities for the uninsured, and that comes out of the Wilper study. Okay, but if we take the 300, then we'd be looking at 150,000 fatalities per year. Now, as a matter of fact, I don't think we really are looking at 150,000 fatalities per year in case of a repeal of Obamacare, which we are probably bound to get. Okay, I think the ratio of 1 in 300 is an outlier, and I don't think it's really well documented by the data. So in terms of the ratios that I think are plausible, okay, at this time, okay, I think the ratio of 1 in 830, based on data from Massachusetts, okay, sounds like a plausible one. The Finkelstein ratio of 1 in 769 sounds like a plausible one. And my correction of the Wilper study, which produced a ratio of 1 in 781, also sounds like a reasonable estimate. So the figures for fatalities that I gave you earlier, the total fatalities from the Obama administration and the projected ones from the Trump administration, used the 1 in 781 as a basis. Okay, so just so you know, that one is in the ballpark of some other studies which are also plausible. But the ratio of 1 in 300 looks like it's far too pessimistic. Now, I'm not going to mince words here. There are many right-wingers and centrists who think that the odds ratios in the Wilper study, the Finkelstein study, and the first of the summer studies are also far too pessimistic. And they wonder and they reason about the strength of the causal inference that a lack of insurance, okay, is indirectly causing fatalities, such that if we insure people, by getting them on Medicaid, for example, or getting them into a Medicare for All program, that will reduce the fatalities the uninsured are currently experiencing anywhere close to zero. Okay, and that is not to mention that they don't think the estimates that I've spoken of are really reasonable estimates. And having read their criticisms, I can tell you that they sound like they're reasonable on the surface, but I'm also going to tell you something else. Everyone who writes about this area, which is so critical to the well-being of so many people, finds it very, very hard to avoid grinding an axe. Everybody comes to this with certain predispositions. Himmelstein, okay, and Woolhandler, for example, Himmelstein at least, okay, among those two, okay, and Woolhandler, I suspect, for nearly as long, have been working to get a Medicare for All bill passed for 30 years now. So, of course, they have a very strong interest in getting the fatalities figure in line with what they want to do in policy making. Having said that, I think their writings and their research pretty good from a design point of view and from a modeling point of view, and they use the best data at hand at the moment. There's a sad shortage of data in this area. The 3 quasi-experimental studies, that I mentioned, the Finkelstein and the 2 Summers analyses, are state-level analyses. They're not national-level analyses. The first 2, the cohort studies, were based on survey data, so they are national-level analyses. But the state-level analyses so far have only covered a few states, maybe 5 states altogether. So we don't have a lot of data on this yet, and we need much more. But on the other hand, if we reject the projections that show large fatality numbers just because they're large, and we don't want to believe it, then what are we risking? If we're wrong in doing that, we're risking all these deaths occurring. We're risking that 823,500 actually being true. Can we really afford to risk that? Okay, let's go a little further here. Okay, so again, we come back to the butcher's bill. 823,500 fatalities over 16 years, provided Trump passes something like the AHCA. Twice the military deaths in World War II of 400,000. That's not something that I want to risk. And I hope it's not something that you want to risk also. So let's review what H.R. 676, the bill on the floor of Congress right now would do if we get behind it, if we insist on it, if we don't accept any compromises to it, if we make it a life or death issue, if we make it hot and dangerous for anybody to vote against it. Okay? And therefore, if we manage to push both the Democratic Congress people and also the Republican Congress people and also Mr. Trump to give in and pass this bill, here is what we get. Everyone is covered automatically at birth. There's coverage for all medically necessary services. That includes chiropractic and mental health services and any other medically necessary services that you can think of. Oh, also dental. I forgot to mention dental. Okay. It redirects many billions of dollars in administrative waste to care without any net increase in healthcare spending. So, what the P&H people are saying when they say this is they're saying, first of all, there's only $400 billion in administrative waste in the system now. I don't think it's that at all. I think there's something like 1.1 trillion we can do without, and that we will do without if we get rid of private health insurance and go for a Medicare for all system. How I know that is that Canada, in terms of percent of GDP, spends 2/3 of what we do. Currently, we're spending on health care $3.3 trillion annually. In one way or another, either through taxation or through copays or through deductibles, That's coming out of the pockets of the private sector. So there's $1.1 trillion there that can be saved. Okay, so not only would there be no net increase in healthcare spending, okay, but even if the federal government has to increase its current spending, or the combined federal and state governments have to increase their spending from, let's say, 1.4 trillion, which I believe it is now, or 1.3 trillion, to 2.1 trillion, we would still be spending something like 400 billion less than we are spending now on the healthcare system, and every last person who wants to be in the program would be covered by the program with no copays and no deductibles, free at the point of service. Furthermore, there's no need, even though the P&H people say that premiums and out-of-pocket costs are replaced with income and wealth taxes of a progressive nature, and they say 95% of Americans will pay less for care than they do now, it seems to me that that's bad economics. That what we should do now is not increase the taxes we pay for health care at all. Leave them where they are. At the 1.3 to 1.4 billion we're already spending on that. Spend the extra 700 billion, which I think it would cost to get a proper Medicare for All program in place, and still save $1.1 trillion out of our pocket, or something like that. That's the way to, the better way to go, because the 600 or 700 billion that we are not trying to pay for with taxes will enter the economy as deficit spending, and the fiscal multipliers on that added to the economy in a one-time splash will multiply those jobs. There was an econometric study done by the California Nurses Association, now part of the National Nurses Union, done in 2008, which estimated that 2.5 million jobs would be created by making this change to Medicare for All. That was a pretty good study, but it assumed that we would pay for everything. Whereas here, we're deficit spending $600 to $700 billion. So, with the fiscal multiplier produced by that, we would go a long, long way to creating full employment. I still would like to have a federal job guarantee program, okay, of course. But once we've done that, we'd probably find relatively few people getting into the federal job guarantee program. Okay, but that is, in a way, kind of off the subject. The PNHP people also mentioned that we'd be getting large-scale cost controls, specifically negotiated fee schedules with our physicians, bulk purchasing of drugs, hospital budgeting, capital planning, in order to ensure that benefits are sustainable over the long term. Now, we don't worry if we subscribe to MMT, we don't worry about the financial sustainability question, even though the PNH people do. we know financial sustainability is taken care of. But there are still sustainability questions. And these relate to having a sufficient number of caregivers and doctors and resources to run the Medicare for All program. In other words, do we have the real resources without shortchanging other parts, of the economy? I think we do, and that really will be no problem about that. But it's certainly true that if the extremely wealthy people currently running our private insurance system are not draining money from the economy, that we will probably have a more sustainable system because they will not be a drag on growth. They will not be a drag on jobs in other sectors anymore. And so in that sense, doing those things will make the system a more sustainable system over the long term. Now, besides everything I've mentioned so far, you would also get a free choice of your doctor and hospital. Now, of course, your doctor would have to agree to be in the Medicare for All program, but frankly, not many doctors would have a choice about that, because once there are no more health insurance companies and few private profit-making hospitals, and also negotiated physician costs, the pull of the Medicare for All program economically on physicians will be irresistible. Remember what people said when Canada instituted its Medicare for All program. I'm old enough to remember that. And I remember how everybody here was saying, all these Canadian doctors are now going to come to the United States because they won't be getting paid well. In Canada, Canada's facing a major brain drain. Well, guess what happened? In the first few years, there was a little brain drain, but it stopped. And now, at this point, there isn't a brain drain to the United States. That's a major problem for Canada. But I also ask you the following question. What if we were to institute a Medicare for All system here? Would our doctors be migrating to Canada? Would they be migrating to New Zealand? Would they be migrating to Australia? Would they be migrating to the UK? Where would they go where a market-based non-Medicare for All program where they can charge exorbitant rates still exists? They would not be able to find such a place. So, except for a few concierge doctors and very specialized doctors who cater only to the wealthy and the rich, if you don't have one of those doctors now, you're going to have a free choice of your doctor. And all the hospitals will most probably be in the program also, so you're going to have your free choice of hospital too, because of the market power of a national improved Medicare for All program. Okay. So, those are the features of it. If there's anything you don't like, let us know. We'd be interested to hear it. So how will we fund it? How will we fund it? Well, as I said earlier in one of my sessions, we actually fund things through Congress. Congress appropriates the spending. And that funds the spending, except for the mechanics. So the question we have to address to ourselves is, what are the tools that are available to Treasury to figure out, not to figure out, what are the tools available to Treasury that it can figure out how to use in order to fill its spending account with the mandated appropriations for Medicare for All that it would have from Congress. So I would say here, just let them figure it out. I know they have the tools. But as I said before, let Congress not increase taxes beyond where they currently are. As I said before also, there will be a $700 billion gap if there is no increase in taxes. That is, we're not going to pay for it all with $400 billion saved in waste. That's not going to happen. There is going to be a gap. Just don't pay for the gap by taxing. Don't pay for the gap. Let the Treasury figure out how to fill its account using its other tools. Using its other tools. Well, let's say Congress says, we're not going to let you exceed the debt ceiling. We're not going over the debt ceiling. Even though we mandated you spend this money and you're mandated to spend it, we're not going to let you float the necessary debt in order to spend it. So I say, that's great. Let the Treasury figure out how to fill its account with its other tools. It's smart enough to figure out that it can just throw one platinum coin in the fountain annually to close any gap. For the young people among you, I'm sure you remember the movie. For the older people among you, I'm sure you remember the movie Three Coins in the Fountain. Well, this is one coin in the fountain of the Federal Reserve that will turn the fountain on. Okay? It could be a platinum coin with a face value of $700 billion to cover the gap. And once they do it once, and they show it can be done, then the practice can be continued year after year after year for as long as it's needed. And of course, that gets around the debt ceiling, because if we use platinum coin, forced revenue from the Federal Reserve, I say forced because it's a message to the Federal Reserve to fill the Treasury account that they have to listen to, then that means that if you define deficits by government spending minus tax revenues, there will still be a deficit. That $700 billion, that gap, is going to be a deficit. So now I want to move to the overall question, and I think the most important question which besets us tonight and besets us as a nation. It's observable to us, I think we all see it, that our elected leaders often act in ways that threaten or even kill us. Some of us, anyway. And maybe eventually all of us. There are unnecessary wars. Seeing tonight. There's the failure to contain climate change, which threatens our very existence. There's the failure to legislate a Medicare for All bill that will save those 823,000 lives. Well, not 823,000 anymore, just 456,000 that would be lost in the Trump administration. Also, Congress passes legislation that provides the means for wealthy individuals and corporations to loot us, to pollute our water supplies, and poison our food chain. Look at the advantages and the legislation that supports Monsanto. Look at the failure to pass legislation that gives us the infrastructure to purify our water supplies. Look at the pro-fracking legislation and pro-fracking orders that threatens the water supplies of whole regions of the United States. I mean, what is risking that about? It's about people who don't care about other people anymore. Then there's legislation that deprives us of our voices and our votes. We earlier talked about the possibility of a constitutional convention stacked by legislatures in a majority of the states with right-wingers who want to end our democracy. What's that about? Why do we tolerate this on? The week before last, a blogger by the name of Matt Brunig wrote a post on Medium about the moral monsters. He pointed out that the difference between Obamacare and the AHCA is 24 million uninsured people, while the difference between single payer and Obamacare is 28 million uninsured people. Parenthetically, I think the difference between Obamacare and the AHCA would turn out to be more than the 24 million. The 24 million was the CBO estimate. Others were estimating 26 million. And in this kind of situation, the people who do these estimates always underestimate what the reality turns out to be. I'm willing to put money on the table that if the AHCA passed, we would find this figure more like 32 million uninsured people rather than 24 or 26, which are estimates coming from the mainstream. Anyway, Brunig went on, and he said, if you favor Obamacare over single payer or dismiss single payer as relatively unimportant, then you are a moral monster, at least on a par with the proponents you condemn. So go to Medium and look up Brunig, okay, Matt Brunig, Bruenig, and then you'll be easily able to find his post, opponents of single-payer moral monsters on a par with AHCA proponents. So I like the way Brunig framed this in terms of moral monsters. But I don't think this is about people being left without insurance. It's about the deaths that result from this legislative. Remember, all the stuff we've been talking about, these are legislative choices that either the Congress makes or the Congress fails to make. So I want to know, how many Americans will die needlessly before Congress passes national improved Medicare for all, or NIMA? Only the people and the moral monsters can answer that question. It's up to us to get the moral monsters who are killing us out of office. Okay, it's our movement. It's about getting rid of and making those among them who don't think they are moral monsters face the facts that they are, and they have to quit being moral monsters. That's the importance of what we're doing here with MMT and with the various issues that we cover and the various issues that we are concerned with. So that's my spiel for tonight. If there are any questions, any further things to be said, I'll be happy to entertain them.
I don't know, Joe. I don't see anything yet. But I'll ask you a question. Let me ask you a question, Joe. With the fact that people are literally dying, there is an entire movement that's beneath the surface. Sometimes they come out of the shadows. Most of the time they don't. That are into this population control thing. And there are the dark mumblings of, by making healthcare scarce, by making us stressed out and suffering, it prevents the advances in medicine to allow us to live longer, which is a form of population control. And the more cynical amongst us feel that this is a certainty. Those of us who just have that weird itch in the back of our head say, I wonder. What are your thoughts on that? Did you hear me?
I think we're still connected.
Could you hear me?
But I also, I could hear part of it, but you're kind of fading out at this point.
Well, let's see if you can hear me. Okay. Basically, what I was asking is,
I can still hear you. Yeah.
Okay. There is a lot of people going around right now that are absolutely convinced that the reason that we are struggling to get this stuff through is because it's being used as a form of eugenics or population control. There are those of us who just scratch our head and wonder why the hell they would make us struggle so mightily. What are your thoughts here? I mean, what is the intent of making people struggle and die? What is the reason for that?
Well, I know the reason that some of the other side may have in their minds, which is that they have a picture of human nature that's right out of the 19th century. In other words, what they believe is that when Darwin was talking about the survival of the fittest, that he was talking at the individual level. Herbert Spencer extended his thinking in the 1860s to the individual level, and basically extended his thinking to conclude that in order to survive, individual people had to be tough, had to rely on themselves, had to be strong and had to compete, okay, with other individuals until only the strongest and most powerful one would survive. And that ideology has come down to us through the sector, even though evolutionary theory and evolutionary science has moved beyond such an interpretation, which is totally implausible today. In fact, people who study evolution have been studying, well, first of all, they conclude that survival of the fittest refers to survival at the species level, not at the individual level, as Darwin said himself. And that furthermore, those who survive are very much those who collaborate and who cooperate and who stick together and to take care of their own, not those who look always to be toughening up everybody, okay, and to let those who are weaker die quickly, as Alan Grayson said. Okay, that's not what evolutionary science teaches us today. Okay, if it ever did teach us anything else. Certainly today its message is very plain, and it doesn't reason as these right-wingers do. Now, they take some of their ideology from that. They take some of their ideology from the Protestant ethic also. Okay, but basically what they're about is a conception of society composed of atomized individuals, each competing for survival and for prosperity. Democratic countries don't believe in that. Democratic peoples don't believe in that. Real progressives don't believe in that. Hope I answered that question.
You did, sir. You did. So let me just say with that, we're about 15 minutes over or 10 minutes over the hour. If anybody else has any further questions, go ahead and get them out there. If not, I'll give you one more question. I'll wait and see if anything else pops up here for a second.
Okay, good. What I'm really interested, in knowing is, have in these talks about the Medicare for All situation, have I given people information that they can use when they advocate for Medicare for All? That's important to know.
I think based on the comments that I'm seeing, Joe, everybody feels that you've hit the ball out of the park tonight. I think it was quite accessible, and I think the information was stellar. And I think it was very, very relatable. And I'm basing that on not only the comments coming back, but based on my own, I feel like you just did a wonderful job explaining a very, very important topic that we're facing right here, right now.
Okay, thank you. Well, then there's one final thing, that I want to say. We've been through a struggle for Medicare for All before, during the 2009 to 2010. And during that time, there were progressives who were constantly putting aside Medicare for All and were talking to us about the public option. Okay? And arguments went back and forth between the public option and a Medicare for All bill. And we've been through this reasoning process already. I've been through it, and I've written about it. And at some time in the future, perhaps not too distant future, I would like to do a program on why almost the worst strategy you can use in order to get health care for everyone is to advocate for a public option instead of advocating for Medicare for all. The public option, my friends, is a trick sparkle pony. And it's a trick sparkle pony that leaves you with nothing, leaves you with a nothing burger.
Yeah.
So at some time in the future, I want to explain the process by which the public option becomes a nothing burger in theory, whereas Medicare for all becomes the finest hamburger you ever tasted.
That's awesome. Hey, Joe, one thing I want to bring up one of our guys here made a great point. He's, you do some of these follow-up writings to what you do on these shows. A lot of time, I've seen you put out some articles about the show and stuff. This might be one of those where you take and create like a top 5 talking points with maybe references, if you're so moved to do so, because I know several people are asking.
Right, I'm now roughly 2/3 done with the blog that works its way through the confusion of the odds differences among these various studies, and that then is going to end with the talking points and with the reasoning that I gave you tonight in the last half of this particular presentation. Okay, so I'll have that up in a few days.
Fantastic.
I may have it up by tomorrow. If not, I'll probably almost certainly have it up by Tuesday.
That's beautiful, Joe.
Okay, and then after that, I'm going to do another piece on why the public option is a nothing burger. Okay? And so people will have that to refer to also.
Very, very good. All right. So with that, let me thank you, Joe. This was absolutely wonderful. I know last week you went on a marathon for 2 hours. Tonight you're at that hour and 16-minute mark. You're just rolling with it. And the good news is for all of us, the information you're providing is so vital to our ability to actually execute. We need to get a lot more people over here to Real Progressives to actually hear these things, share these things, get the word out, so that we can then in turn turn around and organize based on this information. This information is not meant to be good for game night at the neighbor's house. This is supposed to be acted on. And for us to act on it, we have to have more people, because 3 or 4 people going and showing up with a sign is not going to get the job done. So with that, Joe, I want to thank you so much for providing the food. Let's hope that the people provide the energy and the action. And with that, I'm going to say good night. Thank you, sir, for a great one. And folks, tomorrow night, we'll have Ellis Winningham joining me. And then I've got a couple really good ones coming up here aside from that. I've got Stephen Hale coming back on Tuesday night. And I got some surprise people coming up that I'm going to keep under the radar here. But in any event, I want to thank you so much, Joe, for joining us. And we will talk again next week.
Thank you, Steve.
You got it. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to Real Progressive.
Okay, see you next week, folks.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.